It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. And as thus begins one of the most iconic dystopian novels ever written. Hello, everyone. Britton here, also known as the Moki Dude, and if you couldn't tell by the passage I was just quoting, I'm covering 1984 today by George Orwell. Yes, it's been on my mind recently since that new Audible audio drama. I guess you could call it an audiobook, but it's technically an audio drama that they just put out. Tom Hardy's in it, Andrew Garfield's in it, Andrew Scott from Sherlock is in it. He plays Moriarty. I almost said Moriarty. But 1984 has been on my mind recently, and I thought I would do a review for it. I did have a copy. I own a copy. I just don't know where it's at the moment, so we'll have to make do. But let's get into it before I start rambling for too long. 1984 is one of the most influential dystopian novels ever written, and I have no idea how I will do justice to it with a simple review, but I'll do my best. Instead of just talking about what the book's about and all that, I'll tell you how I learned about this book, and how I learned about this book is kind of a funny story. I listened to the Lonely Island song YOLO. Do you guys remember that? The Lonely Island, that like group, Andy Samberg's in it. A couple of other guys who ended up getting famous were on SNL for a while. They mentioned the book, and for some reason my 13-year-old, 14-year-old brain was like, I want to know about that book. So I picked it up, and I remember my little 13, 14-year-old brain was blown away and absolutely terrified at Orwell's vision. I read 1984 during a very impressionable part of my life. You may have remembered I've talked about there was a phase in my young life where I decided to read a lot of the so-called classics that they make you read in school, out of curiosity to see what all the fuss is about. And there were some of them, like Heart of Darkness, Lolita, Great Gatsby, and even Orwell's other famed novel, Animal Farm, have become favorites of mine. I've gone back and forth over the years on 1984, and if I could be spicy, I do think that Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is a far more insidious and terrifying dystopia. Nonetheless, I think 1984 is one of the finest novels of the English canon, and I think it's one that everyone should read at least once. As you guys know, I often complain about how people write politics. Now I'm not one of those guys like Critical Drinker or Razor Fist who lambast things as woke without even trying to engage with the subject matter that they're critiquing. I find that a lot of works that attempt to be obvious with their political commentary or messaging can be really clumsy in their approach. And if you guys know, I have complained about that a lot in the past. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. When I read a book, I hate being preached at. Kitty wants me to pet her. Now, that's not to say that political commentary should be subtle or subtextual all the time. There are certain works like Perdido Street Station and Transmetropolitan, the comic book, that aren't at all subtle about their messaging or their political commentary. But they still create stories that are thematically rich and complex and interesting. 1984 shows you how it's done well, and as much as it vexes me when people try to use this book to justify their side and talk about stuff that the other side is doing that they don't like, I have to admit that 1984's genius really shows itself when people do just that. The world of 1984 is an exaggerated one. It definitely is inspired by places such as Stalinist Russia or Nazi Germany, so definitely places that kind of went crazy, if you really want to keep things simple. But Orwell gives the world enough depth and believability to where you completely buy that this world could definitely happen in our future. And some say it already has. One of Orwell's chief obsessions, and one that you really see throughout his work, is how language influences people, and how governments, or the people who are supposed to be in charge of us, often use language to indoctrinate people or get them to believe things that are clearly not true. You see this a lot through the story. Winston, our main character, works for the government, censoring documents and changing things so that they can convince people that things are going on when they might not even be going on. I would also recommend the book to, if you don't mind a little non sequitur, I would definitely recommend Orwell's essay, Politics in the English Language, as something to read while you read 1984, or if you're curious, you can read it after 1984. Because a lot of the themes that are covered in 1984 are also covered in Politics in the English Language. It's a great essay. It's really quite interesting. Um, it also has created some interesting trends that I've complained about in the past, but I think it is a great essay. It covers a lot of the same topics that 1984 is covering. I wouldn't be shocked if Politics in the English Language was in a copy of 1984 somewhere as like a foreword or even an afterword or just some extra stuff you can read while reading the book. It definitely is a well, like I said, I think the two complement each other very well. And also, if I recall correctly, Orwell wrote Politics in the English Language not long after he published 1984. So clearly, the themes he was talking about in 1984 were in his mind as he was reading it. But getting off topic, but in 1984, we see this theme really be discussed in the term of newspeak, which is where words like thought crime or doublethink come from. The party is obsessed with control. And often, and what they figured out is that the most effective way that they seize control is by influencing how people speak. And once you can influence how people speak, you can influence how people think. And that is ultimately the party's goal. Orwell is very clearly focused on this theme throughout the story. We see it through Winston's job. We also see it when he goes to the Ministry of Love. We see it throughout the story. We also see many other things as well. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't want to start rambling too much. There are people who say that 1984 has flat characters. I disagree, but I can see where they're coming from. It is clear Orwell's focus is mainly on the themes he's exploring and the world he's created with Airstrip 1. Hey, come here. But the characters are certainly there, and Orwell makes them distinct enough to where they feel like authentic people. Winston, in particular, is very much a character with his own agency, with his own beliefs and thoughts about the world. Though I find much of the characterization is rooted in Orwell's exploration of how orthodoxy and blind obedience saps the humanity away from you. It's ultimately what makes 1984 such a terrifying book. The party is nigh omnipotent, and it is always watching. It will turn your own children against you, and will make you happy that they did it. For all of Orwell's political commentary and world building, 1984 is actually a very intimate story about a man fighting against a system that he has no chance of escaping, much less defeating it. But we also see the themes of humanity just being completely wiped out by complete orthodoxy. As I've said before, the party doesn't care much for thinking, feeling individuals. They just want robots that can parrot what they think so they can control them better. But I digress on the topic at hand. But I do think that the characterization is solid, and the people who say that 1984's characterization isn't that good, I have to disagree with them. Again, I can understand where they're coming from. It is clear that Orwell is much more interested in the themes that he's talking about here, and the world that he's created. I remember my friend Josh in our Fahrenheit 451 conversation said that the world building in this is actually more interesting than the actual story. And I would agree. I think that really Orwell's focus is making this world a very authentic place, making it feel like this could happen. While the characters are more of a secondary focus, but they are a focus because again, if we don't care about Winston, and Orwell I think does a pretty good job of making you care about Winston, even though he is kind of this nebbish, dweeby, almost 40-year-old guy, you do care about him. And that's ultimately what makes 1984 so terrifying, is because we do see the humanity in this man, but ultimately that humanity gets stripped away to where he basically becomes a shell of a person by the end of the story. But again, I don't want to spoil too much. You guys are going to have to read it for yourself. Okay, so now you're probably going to see a more contentious side of me because I'll admit I do have some things to say about 1984, and it's going to probably get a little ranty. So, yeah, let's get into it. Now, I've said before, and some people were asking me what I meant. I think it was on one of the State of Science Fictions, but I was talking about 1984, and I said I would definitely rant about it if I kept talking about it for too long, and people asked me what I meant. Well, it's not necessarily the book itself that bothers me so. It's, as I hinted at towards the earlier in the video, my issues with 1984 are more about its impact and how people often use it for their own ends, when that's not what Orwell intended, and that's not at all what the book is about. All the time I see people talking about how we're in 1984, the thought police are here now. Shut up. No, you're not. We're not even close to 1984. Now, are our governments, even ours, doing stuff that is definitely Orwellian? Sure. I won't disagree with that. But the government isn't trying to get us, isn't changing the history books. It isn't telling us what to think. It isn't trying to torture and mind rape you into thinking that 2 plus 2 equals 5. North Korea, that's 1984. Russia, even, that's 1984. Stalinist Russia, that Orwell was commenting upon with this book, that's 1984. We're not even close to 1984. So anyone who actually unironically thinks that we're in 1984 right now, I don't know what to tell you. What also bothers me about this book, going back to its impact, is really how people often use it in political corners to justify their side. And as I said before, I do think that speaks to 1984's genius because it does transcend political ideology. But George Orwell did not write 1984 because for the right or for the left. George Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning to people about an existential threat not only to our civilization, but to humanity itself. And that's totalitarianism. And the fact that people are deliberately ignoring that, and the fact that people are just using it for their own ends, it frustrates me to all hell. And I hate it, and I wish it wouldn't be the case, but unfortunately, the world we live in is hardly a perfect place. People like to think that they're right, and they will do anything that they can in order to have proof to that belief that they're right. I honestly wish that it weren't the case, and I wish that people would actually engage with 1984 as a book in and of itself. It is a warning, not just to socialists, not just to conservatives, not just to liberals. It is a warning to everybody. He is saying this could happen if we are not careful, if we are not vigilant. It doesn't matter what you are. What matters is how much you value the things that we value the most, such as your humanity and your freedom to be human. We don't want the thought police. I can tell you right now, I'm sure no one wants the thought police. No one wants 2 plus 2 equals 5. No one wants the ministry of love and ministry of peace, all that stuff. So be vigilant, because George Orwell wrote this in order to tell you what the world could be like if we're not careful. And squabbling about petty political matters and using this book, which is clearly not meant to do that, in order to do that, I'm getting lost in thought. My point is, I hope I'm making sense here, but my point is that 1984 is a warning, and everyone should take heed of it. Because if we don't, we may end up in a world just like it. That was a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sorry I don't mean to end this video on a bit of a heavy note, but I just felt like I need to get that out of the way because I just get so frustrated with people who attempt to use this book for their own ends. Excuse me. But that is all I have for you today. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I really don't have much to say. If you guys have your own thoughts on 1984, let me know down below in the comments section what you think and how you feel. Like, subscribe, comment. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Goodreads and Letterboxd, where I write reviews that are probably more coherent than the one you just heard right now. You can also find me on Discord. You can also find me on Blue Sky. I always forget to bring up Blue Sky. You can find me on there. I don't post there very much because I really like Twitter, and I don't really want to leave Twitter, to be honest with you. But, alas, here we are. As I've said before, like, subscribe, comment. As my friend John Minton likes to say, it feels good when you press that like button. Tell me your thoughts about 1984. Would love to hear it from you guys. I won't keep rattling on for too long. Until next time, hope you guys enjoyed. Bye-bye.